Hello everybody and welcome back to Screen Stars. I'm here today to bring you my review for the PlayStation 4 survival open world horror game Fate to Silence. Now this is a game that was released, I can't remember the date, it's only a couple of weeks ago. I wasn't going to get initially. I knew it was coming out. I'd seen some gameplay from the PC. I'd even watched a couple of reviews that weren't overly complimentary, but they didn't crap all over the game as well, if you like. And there was a lot about this game that sounded pretty interesting to me. And then I saw the release price of it, and it was $44.99 in the UK, and I just thought that was extreme for a game of this sort. And then I think about 4 or 5 days after it was released, and I hadn't bought it on its release date, I had a little bit of extra cash to spend, and I thought, well, I'll give this game a go because it does interest me and it does intrigue me. And what is this game essentially about? Well, you are this character who wakes up, who is in this kind of post-apocalyptic world that has been cursed to some degree, and there's these creatures running around, there's endless winter, freezing everywhere, supplies are pretty much non-existent, and you've got to try and figure out what is going on. That's the general gist of the game here, and the story itself is pretty weak from my perspective. It didn't really do anything for me. It's just kind of a mystery, I suppose. It's just a setting for them to put this game in. So you essentially are this character who can't die, really. And every time you do die in this game, you end up spawning pretty much at the same place. And your job here is you're at this camp with your daughter, and you've got to go out into the wilderness, collect supplies, craft, explore, come back to your camp, expand on that camp, build huts, build resources, facilities, fences, gates, make it stronger, go out into the wilderness, find followers, bring them back so that they can help you build and fortify your base, or go out on expedition with you, etc, etc. Now I've just realised something. I've just kind of given you the whole concept of this game, and I've not got an awful lot to talk about after that, believe it or not that I can think of. This game was quite disappointing to me, to be honest. There's a lot about this game that really interested me. I like open world games. I like the idea of this game. I like crafting and building. That was before Fallout 4. Crafting and building in games didn't do a lot for me, to be honest. But and then I got so obsessed with it in Fallout 4. That's what all I cared about in that game. By the end of it was like building my bases and making them better, and I literally spent countless hours in that game doing that. So for me now, any kind of open world game that offers those mechanics in it, I'm immediately interested now, because it's something I really like. I find it quite relaxing and fun to do. However, it's quite tokenistic in this game. You don't have an awful lot of room to build. You can kind of build what you want, and it'll put up the outline of it, and then when you've collected the resources, it'll start building it almost. So you can kind of, I quite like it. You can kind of plot out in advance where you're putting everything, and then you can prioritize which ones will get built first, if that makes sense. And like I say, you go out into the wilderness, and it's simply a case of wandering about, picking up supplies. Initially you can't pick up that many supplies, so it's quite frustrating, because you keep having to travel back to your base to drop things off there in the trunks and things, and you've got to go back out into the wilderness, do more resource collecting, come back to your base. It's back and forth, and the problem is the stuff that you're doing out in the wilderness is never a big enough pull to pull you back. There's not enough exciting things to do out in the wilderness. It's the same thing over and over. Collect resources, and you come across an occasional enemy that spawns out of the ground, these like cursed creatures, and then you'll have an odd interaction with the main bad guy in the game, you know, that seemingly brought you back from the dead, sort of thing. And that it's rinse and repeat, and none of the mechanics are interesting enough to keep sending you back out there. When you go back to your base, there's not an awful lot to do there other than build. When you go out into the wilderness, there's not an awful lot to do there other than resource collect, and as you can see on screen there, is like try and uncurse the land, because you have this ability to try and cleanse the land. But you don't really feel the effects of it. It doesn't feel any different when you've cleansed an area or something, you know. You can't expand your base out into the bits you've cleansed. But as the game progresses, and I'll be honest, I haven't completed the game because I just don't have the enthusiasm to do it. It's not grasped me, this game. This is more of a quarter of the way through with you, if you like, because the story's not interested me enough, the mechanics haven't interested me enough, and what you do doesn't interest me enough, and the game's setting is a bit dull. It's just constant winter. You're just wandering about in the snow, occasional blizzards, and it gets a bit monotonous just hearing the crunch of snow under your feet all the time, and trying to fight off hypothermia and freezing to death, and it just, the mechanics they put in the game are not done well enough to want you to continue to play the game. It doesn't grab you. Now you can expand further into the map. You can go out on expeditions with sleds, etc. And like I say, you can bring followers with you, but it's kind of pointless doing that, because the followers are kind of useless when you get into battles, really. And the combat, I think, is so basic. You'll see in the video that I've put, you'll see occasional clips of combat, and it is so basic. It's you've got like a strong attack and a weak attack, and you can like dodge, that sort of thing, and you can craft different weapons. So you start off with like a torch that you can batter enemies with. Then you can craft an axe, then a sword, and then better versions of all these weapons, and a bow and arrow. But the combat remains the same, really, regardless of what weapon you've got, unless you're using a bow and arrow. But I found that so clunky, I've barely used it. And the combat is so simplified and boring. It's just a case of do one strong attack, which takes up all your stamina, walk away from the enemy for a couple of steps, and then do another strong attack, and then walk backwards again, wait till the stamina starts going slightly up, and you'll see this in a minute on there's some combat coming up. So you hit it with a strong attack, move back for a couple of seconds while your stamina starts filling up, and then do another one, goes back ever so slightly, then another one, and then 3 or 4 goes of that, depending on the enemy, and you've killed it. It's dull. The combat isn't interesting, in my opinion. The environment isn't interesting. It never changes it up enough, the environments, I don't think. The followers have not really got anything interesting to say, and one of the biggest problems of this game is the way it looks. It looks like an early PlayStation 3 game. I think the graphics are just bloody awful for a game on a PlayStation 4 that's coming to the end of its cycle. Now you think of PlayStation 3, the games we were getting when that game was coming to the end of its cycle, The Last of Us, things like that. Outstandingly brilliant looking games, and this is coming to the end of the cycle on PlayStation 4, and we're getting this game, and it looks basic, and the mechanics are basic, and the combat is basic, and it's just, everything functions, but it's not interesting. Is the best thing I can say about this game. Everything works, everything functions. I've not come across any terrible bugs, any shockingly bad bugs. It's just, there's not enough to hold your attention in this game, from my perspective, and I found it greatly disappointing. Just look at this combat now. Wait while your stamina fills back up, then go straight back into another strong one, walk back, fill it up, and there you go. It's just that simple. The combat is dull, and the enemies aren't varied enough to warrant changing up the combat, if you like. So the survival elements are all there. You've got to eat, otherwise you get you get hungry, so you've got to eat. You've got to look after yourself. You've got to collect all these things and craft all these things, which is mildly interesting. Potions and all the rest of it. But it doesn't. There's not enough mechanics in this game to maintain my interest and enthusiasm to continually play this game. For what it's trying to do, there are better games out there on the market, I would suggest. It doesn't do anything exceptionally well. There's a lot of mechanics in this game. All of them function, but none of them are overly interesting. So I've got to say I was pretty disappointed with this game, and it is not worth the price it is giving at $44.99. Not even close. This is a budget $24.99 game, so if you're thinking about it and you're interested in this game, wait for a sale. Absolutely wait for a sale. So I'm going to give it a 5 out of 10. I found it hugely disappointing, not pretty to look at, and the mechanics pretty dull, and not an awful lot to hold my attention. So that's my review for Fade to Silence. A disappointing game, unfortunately, but let me know in the comments if you're playing it and you are enjoying it, and if there's anything I've missed out on. Let me know in the comments, please. So thank you very much for watching, everybody, and of course I shall see you next time on Screen Stars.